Democratic National Committee Chair Ken Martin released the party's autopsy of the 2024 presidential election after facing intense pressure for many months to do so. The report is challenged throughout by annotations from the DNC, but it paints a picture of missed opportunities, arguing former Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign failed to make an affirmative case for her and that her campaign failed to attack then-candidate Donald Trump with sufficient, quote, negative firepower. Problems also include messaging that, quote, created tensions with key constituencies on the economy, late efforts to organize voters, a lack of alignment between the party's main super PAC and the Harris campaign, and more. The release backfired almost immediately, though, with party officials and strategists blasting Martin, saying the autopsy missed many sections, is filled with annotations that question its own methods, and doesn't capture fully why the party lost the election. It's a start, though. Let's bring in our panel. Annalise Keller is the former communications director for the Republican Senator Cory Gardner. Also with us, former battleground director for the Harris-Walz campaign and former senior advisor to President Obama and Hillary Clinton, Dan Cannon. Happy to have you both this morning. Dan, you know I got to go to you first on this. You were spoken to kind of for the autopsy. What do you make of it?
Look, I think this product is pretty indefensible. I think the process is pretty indefensible. Chair Martin said as much in his statement yesterday. I think at the end of the day, people want to have an autopsy from the DNC because they want to feel something about how we can move forward after a tough loss, right? The reality is that there are lots of other products. Stephanie Shriak did one for SVF. There was Rob Flaherty did a great thing on social media and digital.
I liked his a lot.
It was really well done. There have been numerous conferences and gatherings and data polling in the elections, and a lot of the things that Democrats should be doing that differently from 2024, especially on costs and connecting with voters on the economy, have been happening in the off-year elections, and they've been successful. So in some respects, this is just too late. It's a bad product. I kind of hope we move on from this, to be honest.
Can I ask what your recommendation would be?
On the autopsy?
On what the party should be changing going forward?
Well, there are tactical things, Allie, that frankly weren't about 24, but more about what's coming next. I mean, AI wasn't a big part of 2024. AI is going to be the huge part of 2028. We should be talking about that. There are issues with Act Blue. It's under threat politically and legally. And the low-dollar payment processors that are the foundation of how we pay for campaigns as Democrats needs to be reckoned with going into the next election. There are questions about how committees are going to spend money with the Supreme Court and the 441 AD connections on how committees can coordinate or not coordinate on candidate dollars. These are huge issues. Some of them weren't even in the 2024 context, but are really going to matter for 2028. Those are the discussions we need to be having. And then there's a big question for me as someone who ran a battleground program with 2,700 staff. What does a modern field campaign look like? I don't have an answer to that. I think Rob and I worked on this in the campaign, and he would say, and I would say, we struggled to find a blended model that could be appropriate. These are really good questions to wrestle with. But right now, there are 6 months before the election. Democrats are gaining on the generic ballot. Independents are fleeing the Republican Party because of what's happening on costs. Our focus should stay there and come back to these questions after November.
So as you look over at Democrats only now releasing this autopsy, doing it in a messy fashion for a messy product, and again, Ken Martin acknowledges that, what are Republicans seeing in the autopsy, in the release around it, and what the runway over the course of the next few months into the midterms looks like?
I think Republicans are a little bit less concerned about some of the kind of nitty-gritty political campaign stuff that certainly matters a whole lot to how political campaigns play out and how they function. But I think Republicans are looking at this and saying Democrats really don't have a plan. They really don't have a long-term strategy that's not just Trump is bad. And, you know, the boogeyman is going to be gone. And so there's this feeling that Republicans do not think there is enough of a, platform that Democrats have to really win back some of those working class voters that Republicans were able to make a lot of gains on. Now, all of that is very dependent on Republicans being able to effectively make their case over the next 6 years that they are working on behalf of Americans. So, I think that's something that they're going to have to demonstrate to the American people, too.
Yeah, over the next 6 months, that is going to be the absolute key. I wonder, before we just put a button in this, do you think that the party can talk about what went wrong without talking about Joe Biden himself or even the issue of Gaza and Israel, which was so central in the campaign?
Sure. You can look at the data in Michigan, for example. This does not have to be a gotcha moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Kamala Harris, I think, had something like 40,000 fewer votes than Alyssa Slotkin in Dearborn. She also had something like 40,000 fewer votes in Macomb County, which is sort of auto manufacturing county, right? And Trump came to Michigan a lot and focused on China and autos and EVs and had a really sharp message there. Clearly, Both of those things were the difference between Harris losing by about a point and Slotkin winning by about a point. And they both should be reckoned with on the data. It's there. You can have a dispassionate conversation about this. But really quickly on Annalise's point, if I could, I think you're right about the message we have to have with voters. There is a jump ball for voters who left us in 2020 and then came back to us in 2025 because they're mad about costs now. And they are not our voters. We may win in 2026 because people are really angry. But 2028's got to be a turn-the-page moment for everybody, and I think both parties have a chance to win those voters back. We got to get on the stick on a message.
It's a story of shifting coalitions, and I wonder if I look with the backdrop of this midterm election, Annalise, being about affordability, about Americans seeing prices at the pump rising because of the war in Iran, but then also seeing where the administration itself is focused from a perspective of, are we doing a ballroom? Are we doing a $1.8 billion slush fund for people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th? When you see Republican senators pushing back on that, so much so that they had to punt reconciliation for another week and a half in hopes that they come back in better spirits, what does it tell you about what's going on in the Republican Senate right now?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think it's a difficult moment for Republicans in the Senate right now. It's probably a low point that I've seen over the course of the year between Trump and the administration and Senate Republicans. I don't know if they are going to come back and be able to turn the page from this really messy fight. But, there are so many other things at play here to layer on top. You've got Trump endorsing Ken Paxton in Texas, which I read as a direct rebuke to Senate Republicans.
And to John Thune.
And to John Thune personally, because I felt that he was not willing to fire the parliamentarian, which again, sort of wonky here, but he really wants to follow Senate precedent. And also a lot of Republicans are just uncomfortable with the idea of, for the affordability message that we're all talking about, putting forward $1 billion for a ballroom that's not really been communicated to them very well on, what is this money actually going to be used for? What are the checks and balances to ensure that these, whether it's this fund, this weaponization fund, or whether it's the ballroom money, what is it actually going to be used for? I don't think they really did a good job explaining to Senate Republicans what that was going to look like. And there were some very serious questions that members had, and they were not able to get the answers that satisfied them. They also had a lot of attendance problems, and that's kind of why we're in this fight right now.
And I think the question is, A, does it persist for Republicans, or is it something that dissipates for a party that really has just fallen in with Trump time and again? But for Democrats, how is this an issue that fits into the larger issue set of Republicans aren't working to make your life affordable?
Trump is a prolific messenger, Allie. He can cut through in all kinds of ways. Build the wall was a way to talk about how he was tough on immigration, right? No tax on tips was a really clear way to say I'm with you on the economy. Yeah. Unfortunately for him, I think build the ballroom is the way to demonstrate he's not focused on you. He's focused on himself and what he cares about. And that's devastating when gas is almost $5 a gallon.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, especially when you consider we've had correspondents out talking to people, even folks who voted for Trump, who are saying, I'm just not getting what I thought I was going to be getting because the focus seems so disparate. We're focused on foreign entanglements versus what's happening here at home, or prices rising at the pump, and a president who's saying, I'm not thinking about Americans' economic concerns when I make those decisions. It's an unforced error, certainly, to say something like that, but one that Democrats have to make hay of. Annalise Keller, Dan Cannon, thank you for a rollicking conversation.